About 15 years ago, I got involved in expansion of companies. I utilized socioeconomic theory to build out companies on an international level, and through that experience kind of led me down the path to blockchain. So what I'm just going to do is kind of go through a very easy kind of introduction with blockchain. The essential definition of it, which is, it's a data structure that enables, identifying and tracking transactions digitally, right? There's a distributed ledger. There's a bunch of kind of other jargon that's involved in this, right? But the easiest way to say is that it's just a means for tracking of ownership. A little bit of history, right? So this is kind of just going down a little rundown of what has kind of happened in the space from the very inception of it. So the first was just Bitcoin, which everyone knows. Kind of we'd already discussed that, but it was just really just a peer-to-peer electronic cash, and it utilized this prime number system coding that was actually developed by the CIA. And there's a movie that was Bruce Willis was in like back in the day, where was going into it a little bit about it. That's where like Satoshi kind of came from. He worked at the CIA. And then kind of evolve this out into realizing that it could actually be used in this sense. So the underlying technology of Bitcoin is blockchain, and then suddenly it realized that it could be utilized for things outside of it. Some of those things is smart contracts. So it's automated computer programs. The easiest way to think of it is really AI for just contracts in general, right? Going between people and just automating that entire process. I kind of use this example, and I think we've talked about it, Curtis, a couple times, where you look at Goldman Sachs. For them to just pay out dividends to their high net worth investors in their companies, it goes through about 8 different transactions. Blockchain can just do the entire thing all in one swoop. So that money that's in the time that's wasted and the resources and everything that goes there is then taken out from it. So then it kind of gets distributed further in the entire kind of ecosystem and network that's out there. Then later on, it was a proof of stake. So it's an automated governance system where people can actually vote on everything, and just the same way that it happens within companies and in corporations can now be done within entire system, and it's all tracked and it's all put on the block, right? And then next is blockchain scaling, which is what they realize, and everyone kind of has heard how blockchain is not, or Bitcoin is not exactly it's not very green, right? It utilizes a lot of energy. There's companies that are moving up into Washington area so that they can be on the dowels, so that the hydroelectric can power their farms, right? But then it is really encumbering on the systems that are there because the towns are now kind of overworked with their electric grid. So what happened is that what they realized is that not everything has to be across every single computer that is out there, and it can kind of go into sections, and then it still has a high security basis that's allowing it to perform and be active. Right? So this is what a distributed ledger looks like. There's a centralized ledger on the left, which is essentially what it looks like in the current place. And a distributed ledger is where you have all the nodes and everything kind of works around in a circle. If anyone has any questions on that, I can be free to answer them, but I think it's pretty self-explanatory. So smart contracts, we're going back to that again. It's just a self-executing contract between the buyer and seller, right, and directly written into the lines of code. These contracts are distributed across the distributed ledger and decentralized blockchain network. So it's just approved, and the computation is in scaled across. If any of you guys have seen Silicon Valley, the TV show, in the very first season, this was kind of what they were going after, right? Where it's all of the computers, everyone's cell phone kind of working together to be a giant server farm, essentially. So that's the kind of idea of it. There's 3 core areas that I kind of like to describe that are within blockchain, where a lot of people are really pushing forward on the technology aspect of it, and also the banking and finance, where they're just seeing it as Bitcoin. They're just seeing it as this sort of speculative investment kind of environment. But the one aspect that I feel that a lot of people kind of leave out a lot of times is really the socioeconomic theory of it. Because blockchain is, the way that it's evolved and developed into is it's a giant ecosystem. And that's where like my socioeconomic theory, and background kind of came into it. That's how I kind of stumbled, tripped over myself a few times to get into the industry. By doing that, if you know that there's the value in growing out an entire system, then that's where the value of then the growth and the scale of a company is. And I'll go into the differences of tokens and stuff like that in a bit, but that's where the true utility aspect is that there's more value with a token that is working within the system. If it can be done further and done more, and it can be used and scaled across multiple platforms, then that's where the true value is, right? The more people, the more adoption that it comes into. I kind of use this analogy a lot where, to understand blockchain, it's kind of like a car where you don't have to understand what a combustion engine is, right? Many people do. You can, doesn't matter. But you just need to know how to drive the car, right? The plug and the play aspects of it, the little intricacies, and the scale of what you want to know about that car, right? About blockchain allows you to do whatever you want with it, right? So you don't have to. It's going to be integrated into our system, into our lives, in such a huge basis in the future that we don't have to have this extreme deep dive knowledge. We don't know how our cell phones work entirely. We know the gist of it, right? There's processors and everything like that. But the way you're not going to build out a cell phone. So in simple terms, blockchain is essentially the glue that bonds technology together, right? It kind of works as a catalyst across all industries. It can really be involved in all industries, and I firmly believe that because it's simplicity, it's transparency, the implementation of governance, an open ecosystem, and it's really abundance over scarcity, right? It opens up the platforms to the entire world. So if you kind of look at, not to get political, right? But if there's a lot of things that are voted in that create a big scarcity model, right? In many different ways, in different municipalities. A perfect example of that is sort of like zoning, right? So you do zoning and you can only, build, 3 stories tall and whatever, and that creates that value out of a scarcity model, right? But if you open that up, and essentially blockchain can do it because a governance system can then allow the choice of the people to really enact on that specific thing, then that sort of opens up that abundance.
I would use it like an example of just raising capital,
Yep.
right? There's scarcity of available capital, like through VCs or angels or getting in front of them, right?
Yeah.
So through something like this, you can make an investment opportunity available to anybody that wants to do the transaction and makes it simple and easy and free flowing of that capital opportunity, right? So if I have, if I'm trying to raise capital in the scarce model, right, I have to go find those people who have a big enough check to write towards my business opportunity. Using something like this, as we're seeing with people who are raising capital through cryptocurrency, anybody in the world can participate in that investment opportunity at smaller amounts.
As long as they're connected to that platform.
As long as they're connected to any of the platforms that have the brokerage of it, right?
Yeah.
Same with, like, as an example, insurance. Like right now, there's a scarce number of companies that can provide insurance products, right? A lot of people, as an example, are using a tokenization method to provide insurance to other people. Like, I want to participate in saying that you're not going to get in an accident, and if you do, we're going to fund that accident together. That opening up an abundant opportunity to participate in that marketplace.
But also another one too that's actually I think is pretty good is around IP, right? IP, ownership of IP right now, it's only like one individual and one company that can then like sell the rights off, right? Blockchain will open up that ability so that multiple people can actually tap into it, because then those rights, the rights management of it as it's being used, it can actually be a payment system of who owns that IP, right? And then the person who's using it can then be free to use it. So that's sort of like opening up the abundance of it, right? So it's not just like, here you go, here's Disney, they can only do XYZ, right? They own the rights to Star Wars, blah, 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 whatever, right? So going into what the various tokens are, so there's utility tokens and security tokens. That's what most people are talking about right now. And then there's also a thing called a stable token. Utility token is just the functionality of a token within the ecosystem. It's kind of like a SaaS model, right? So it's like you're renting the services and that's represented as a token, and that token is the smart contracts that end up doing it. The security token basically derives from the value as a tradable asset. So it's the actual company that's broken up as its value class. So just look at it as a share. That's essentially what it is. But what it allows you to do in this basis of blockchain is that you can have all the voting systems that are within it, all the shareholder agreements, all the contracts, everything that you ever do in the very beginning of any sort of deal is done through that. And then that also opens up the ability for the tradable asset and just exchange of assets where it doesn't have to go through an entire process because that's actually baked into the technology, right? It's baked into blockchain. And then there's a stable token, which is more of a recent kind of thing. And that was basically just to create a token that's worth, here's $1 US, this is $1 US token value, right? So that there's no fluctuation of it. People are using that in terms of like agriculture products, so that they know and they understand that it's not going to go haywire, over the course of time. You're up. And then, so what we're going to do? Oh no.
Give it up for this guy. He's gonna be jumping in on my presentation as well.
Yeah.
So everyone, let's do another big round of applause for this guy. Let's get it up for him now. Hey, thanks, Blake. So I'm gonna talk a little bit about impact of manufacturing on the blockchain and manufacturing in the supply chain. Real quick, so who in here is kind of involved in that space, in the manufacturing space? All right, we got some folks. So I'm Curtis Roberts. I'm a technology and startup attorney. I work with early stage companies. My background, Blake kind of alluded to it a little bit earlier. I worked at Goldman Sachs before jumping into the legal world. I was at the SEC, one of the first folks to look into Bitcoin when I was the most junior person there and no one cared. So they're like, yeah, you can do this. So I now work with a lot of early stage companies, helping them run their ICOs, being a part of some of their token offerings, being a part of launching, getting up and off the ground. So, and then I do a lot of outside counsel work. And we partner with other large law firms to do some of the actual launches. I know a lot of this stuff can get really, really dense. We did a talk one time, thought it was great. I organized it. It was to about 40, 60 people. And we got really deep. We had a bunch of blockchain nerds. We got really deep into what is cryptocurrency, where is it headed, what does it look like. And at the end of it, an older gentleman, it was a group of attorneys, he came up to one of the participants and asked if Bitcoins were little bits of gold. And at that point, I knew we did something wrong. So they're not little bits of gold. If that one went over people's heads. So what cryptocurrency is if you distill it down to its very essence, it's what makes money valuable. And if you ask an economist, if you ask a lawyer, if you ask everyone here, you'll get a different definition of what is money. But money has some really powerful properties. And so what makes money valuable? One of the reasons is because we all think that it has value, and we're willing to transact in it and trade it back and forth. Another the reason is it's easy to transport. We all know what $1 is worth and what $1 will buy us. So those are some of the fungibility. Those are some of the aspects that make dollars really valuable to us. And so in cryptocurrency, this is where a lot of people get confused is there's cryptocurrency, which is Bitcoin, Ethereum, all of those types of actual currencies. And then there's the technology that underpins it. And in a lot of ways, the technology that underpins it, the blockchain technology, is a lot more exciting than the actual cryptocurrency function. Some people have said that cryptocurrency is just one of the first ways that blockchain has been able to show how valuable it is. It's one of the first and best use cases we have for it. So today, what I'm going to kind of talk about is how can the blockchain be applied to the supply chain, and what does that mean? What does that look like? And we'll go through a few examples, some areas where it's still tripping up, and some of the benefits and the positives in it. Sound good? Does that work? Cool. Okay, so I mean, sure everyone's familiar with the manufacturing and the supply chain. It's assets from all over the world. We're extracting them, we're designing them, we're combining them, we're moving them, transporting them, we're selling them. It hasn't necessarily been completely overhauled in a while. And whether blockchain will do it or not, it remains to be seen. But we've seen a lot of incremental improvements, and especially in the last 10 years. I mean, if you look at Amazon, if you look at major folks who are moving product around the world faster and faster, it's not something that's going to go away anytime soon. So this combination of technology is really going to be the technologies that kind of break through and impact and are already in a lot of ways impacting the supply chain. I mean, you're seeing it with blockchain, which we'll get into in a minute, cloud computing, which is just keeping a lot of that data online, which is the impact for blockchain, cloud management, keeping track of some of those resources, artificial intelligence and computer image recognizing technology, and then obviously RFID chips and Internet of Things, tracking, transferability, moving, seeing where it's going. So this is what the use case that everyone loves to point to in the supply chain is what benefit are we going to get out of this? And really the answer is data visibility. You're going to be able to see, and this is something we all love and we all can know, you can see where your package is. You can see how it's being tracked. All of that's on the back end. And a lot of that's just being used right now in a centralized database, but that's where, I mean, it's great when we can see our packages from Amazon and how quickly they're going to get to us. We need it now. We want it now. But for companies that need to know, are having 1,000, 10 million unit orders, they need to know where it's at because it's really going to impact their day-to-day. It's going to impact their operations. This is incredibly important. So this is the one that really gets pointed to. I'll talk about some of the drawbacks in a minute. So here's some of the other the positives that you hear about, and don't worry, we got plenty of buzzwords in here for all the folks. So we got less need for some of the middlemen in being able to authenticate transactions, essentially authenticating where things are at and who owns what, where the money is, who owns taxes, what are the liabilities, what are the duties owed to any of the other people in that supply chain. Another one is reduce fraud and errors, improve some of that inventory management, which we talked about a little bit before, minimize costs and reduce delays. This is the one where every single company is really focusing on and working on right now, whether they're using a lot of those other technologies in terms of cloud computing or some have gotten into blockchain. This is what a lot of that focuses on. It's also on identifying issues faster, and this is where you get into some of the really interesting use cases. And then the last one is if you can increase consumer and partner trust at all stages along that supply chain. So here's some of the difficulties, and I'll run through this in examples because I know all of this sounds really abstract right now. But one of the securities, we haven't seen a lot of it. It has actually happened. For a long time, it was theoretical, but what's called a 51% attack. If you get 51% of the machines on the network to create their own new chain, it's essentially a hack of the system. So that's what makes a blockchain immutable is you have the majority of network participants who are good actors in the system. We don't need to go into deep into it because everyone's eyes are going to glaze over. And then software development. This is where you see a lot of the vaporware, things that don't really exist yet, but people really want them to exist. And I'm knock on wood, they will exist, and people are making really, really strong strides in them. There's a lot of complexity in the understanding of it and the adoption, so there is going to be a lot of slow adoption in it. In the same way that we all don't need to know how to build our own blockchains, we all need to know how to build our own cars. And then this buy-in along the supply chain, whether or not you're going to get all of those folks to want to upload something to the cloud, or whether you can start getting RFID chips to do it, whether you can get some of those smart contracts processing these transactions, that's a huge question mark because that's where people are running into issues is some of that buy-in right now. And then the cost of data storage and processing. Blake talked a little bit about that, but at some of the height of the processing times for Bitcoin transactions, you could power like an entire Icelandic house for a year. And so that's where you see some of that downside in the who's going to keep all this data, where are we going to keep it, and who are going to be our processors along the chain. So are you ready for a little game, maybe a little bit of interactiveness? Is everyone okay with that? Maybe this will bring some of these points some of these points home. Okay, so if you are up for playing, will you raise your hand? Okay, we got some folks. All right, so everyone put your hand in the air right now. Just put one arm in the air right now. All right, so we're gonna go through this question, and you're gonna keep your hand up if you think it's true, and you're gonna drop your hand if you think it's false. So true or false, Walmart plans to track its lettuce with the help of blockchain. Who thinks that one's true? This one is true. So this one's a pretty easy one. This is one of the major stories. There's been a lot of stories, interesting ones in the last couple months. And this was actually after the first romaine lettuce outbreak. Hopefully no one is sick or missing work from the current lettuce outbreak. If you've seen the romaine recall recently. But this is one of like a big partnership and use case. And when you're Walmart, you can leverage your entire supply chain and say, we want all of you to upload all of your data so that we can track where every single piece of lettuce is in the entire journey. So this is bringing it home in a practical sense. They did a 2-year pilot test program, and then after the last romaine lettuce outbreak, they launched that, hey, within a year, we're gonna have 100 of our farms on this. This is obviously not something that every single company can do, but Walmart partnered with IBM to create the blockchain that it's going to be kept on, and then they basically just told all their suppliers, upload this data so we know where all of our lettuce is at every single step. And the point is so that they can, if there is an outbreak or if somebody does get sick, they can track back where that person bought that lettuce and who and where it went to. Yeah. The question was, what is the cost to the manufacturers and the farmers? I mean, Walmart and IBM are supplying. They're doing this as a pilot program, so initially they did an opt-in, and then it was, okay, you're doing this, but their cost is their time, which is what they have, is how long it's going to take to upload where every single lettuce bale or every single thing went along the way, where it went, and then trying to get every single person along that to buy in. So the cost is really being borne by Walmart right now in terms of like the actual product cost, because they're using technology to upload it to a blockchain that was created by IBM. So you have to get all of your farmhands who pick it to then scan things, and then I don't know the logistics on every single step along the way, but yeah,
I can talk on it. So essentially, what's really interesting around this kind of the use case of it, right? And this kind of goes outside of what Walmart is doing. But if you look at the value that is there, all the insurance companies that had to then back, or the farm futures that were there on the romaine lettuce aspects, right? The amount of millions and millions and millions of dollars that have been kind of, taken out of the farmers, hands, right? Because they didn't get the full value of the romaine lettuce. So that's where the value then actually gets transferred back to the farmer, is that if it can be tracked, where it's like, okay, here's this 1 acre that it actually came from of the water, or the 1,000 acres here, rather than the millions and millions of acres that it actually came off of. That's the true value of it, right? And so it's kind of like getting people to reprogram their brains around where that value is, where it's an entire ecosystem that gets built out, right? Some of it also, what's really interesting in the case of it is utilizing blockchain. There's things called bounties, where you can unlock tokens, and you can kind of stake tokens where it unlocks when they do perform a certain task. So these farmhands can then have an incentive to then unlock the tracking, right? Or unlock this bounty that is then given to them, and then it can go into their digital wallet that they can essentially exchange later on as well down the line.
And they did this as a test case with some of their oranges, and it took them 7 days their mangoes, sorry. It took Walmart 7 days with their initial, with how they would track it. Whereas when they got all of their mango suppliers on the blockchain, they figured it out in 2.2 seconds, which is pretty remarkable. Okay, so the next one. All right, everyone put your hands up. Okay, so who thinks that Go-Go Chicken is using blockchain and facial recognition to track its chickens? Not a lot of folks. Not very many. Okay, so it's true. It's a company out of China. They've actually got some of their first initial funding from Tencent and Alibaba payments. one of their major one of their major funders now is SoftBank. They're doing this as a pilot program. This is what you're seeing a lot as pilot programs, but they are scanning the faces of hundreds of thousands of chickens that they have, and then they created an app so that consumers can see how much mobility their chicken had and where it was at in every single step along the supply chain. So this one is more of like a B2C play. A bit of it's gimmicky, but it's actually rolling out. So in some select stores, you're going to be able to buy your chicken, scan it with your phone, and see how much the chicken walked around, see the chicken's lifespan, see where it was along every single step. I don't know if people want to know it either, but I guess we're about to find out.
Where they had like a full bio of it in Portlandia, and yeah. So it's kind of funny because it's like actually happening. And then also on this too, what's interesting here is the fact that this is an example of how like blockchain is being utilized as essentially the glue across, right? Because blockchain isn't the facial recognition aspect of it. It's not anything else in the technology here. It's just accelerating the ability of the entire tracking of the system. So.
Yeah, you got to give the people what they want. And they don't want chicken recognition software. They want blockchain, and more blockchain. All right, so the next one, true or false, millions of Atlantic salmon will have their faces stored to keep track of health and threat levels on the blockchain. Everyone's hands up all at once. Who thinks this one's true? Keep your hand up. About half. Well, you're wrong. This one's actually false. I just wanted to put this in there in case you thought that I was lying about being able to scan chickens' faces. So this one's actually, a company is going to be able to scan salmon faces for this killer lice to see which ones have been infected off of some fjords in Norway. This one's being rolled out right now. Okay, so next one. Magenta and Microsoft are testing a system that measures the moisture in peanuts and uploads it to a blockchain. Okay, well, they are doing it. So they're doing it, but they're not doing it on a blockchain. So, I mean, who would have ever thought that a single company keeping all of its data and wanting to have it in one place would use a blockchain? Now they're probably just going to use a normal database for that. It makes a lot more sense. And so I put this one in here because I wanted to talk a little bit about what is real and what isn't in the blockchain space, because you're hearing it a lot. And blockchain, I mean, it's great and it can be an amazing tool, but only if you're having multiple parties who all need a trust verified system. So IBM, which has come in really strong into this space, has launched a product, I think it's called Trees, and they have over 90 companies, different companies on it. They're all uploading bits of their data to this blockchain. So they're all competing companies that then pay to have access to this data. So it's a private blockchain that all of the network participants are responsible for. Essentially, each one of them acts as an accountant, and they check the balance sheet and go, okay, we sign off on this, we sign off on this, we sign off on this. So every single one of those 90 companies will sign off and say, yeah, we verify that. So the only way that you could potentially hack that is if you get 46 of them to lie on something. So the power really lies in not necessarily when you have a single company that just wants to track its peanuts, but when you have multiple different players, all with kind of competing interests that need to interact in one space, and then you can leverage some of the other technologies such as smart tracking, RFID chips. You can use smart contracts so it automatically executes once it's been scanned in and received. So it can underpin a lot of that. But for a lot of this stuff, it still is a ways out in terms of what's the functionality of blockchain and would a cloud computing and a centralized database actually be better? Yeah. His question was, if it's a chain and one of the links break, does all of this fall apart? And there's a little bit of confusion around the term blockchain. It's not actually a chain. It's not actually a circular chain. What it is so Bitcoin might be an easy example, is they have 10-minute blocks. So all of the transactions that occur in Bitcoin within a 10-minute period, like right now, we're in one 10-minute block, all happen in this period and then get added to the chain of other blocks that have been built forever, that have been built since 2008, since the first Bitcoin transaction took place. And so you or I or any of us could go and download that entire history of every single one. So because we can all have access, and we've all agreed on the thousands and thousands of chains, on the thousands of 10-minute blocks preceding this, the only one that's kind of in flux is that last block in the chain. So it's not, don't think of it as a circular chain. Think of it more as like a train. And all of them are locked in. And if you wanted to change the first block, for example, you'd have to go back and change it on every single one of our computers. Because we all have a copy of it. Instead of, right now we're all used to the idea of centralized databases where everything is kept in one place. We all know how much money we have because we can check our bank account. All of it's kept in that one centralized place. What the blockchain allows you to do is everyone has a copy of all of this. And it's encrypted, and so it's encoded. You can't see what it is, but everyone can have a copy of it so you can verify all these transactions and see what's happened at every single chain, see where every single Bitcoin has been spent along the way. So the only like some of the security parameters are in that last 10-minute block. You have to get all of the accountants. Just think of it as like these accountants are trying to compete to balance that ledger. They're trying to compete to get it as fast as possible to make sure that book is balanced. So yeah, if you got more than 51% of them to lie and say, no, it actually looked like this, for your one cup of coffee or for your one Bitcoin that you're transferring, then there's that potential in there. But you can never go back because the blocks start stacking on top of each other.
And an example of that too, right, is that, so the discussion kind of one of the technology advances that were there, one of the technology advances that were there before, right, is that it's the breaking up of those blocks, right, and the computing processing for that, so that 51% that's happening, it's not 51% of the computers that are doing that one single 10-minute block, right? They're all over the place, and no one knows exactly which computers are computing for that one specific block. And so in that system of like, is this a chain that everything is linked up upon? No, it's completely distributed. No one really knows what computers are doing it. They just know that all the computers that have, built out these mining farms, that's essentially what these mining farms are doing, is that they're mining to create these programs to do those 10-minute blocks. So, yeah.
Cool. So is there any other questions? Now's a good time to open it up. The question was, what other industries are going to be impacted, specifically fashion? So a lot of other industries are going to be impacted. So that example that Blake gave about Goldman, that's what I did there, was I processed the back-end transactions. And that's when I heard about blockchain, I immediately got it. I was like, there's so much wasted energy of people processing these transactions and it going back and forth between 18 different folks. Why, if it can be uploaded to a centralized repository, we all have access to it, but it's encrypted. So yes, a lot of other industries are already seeing some of the benefits, specifically like finance. But yeah, in the fashion industry, there hasn't been, at least to my knowledge, a ton of actual use or even pilots of the blockchain. Blake's going to give some examples of some that he's seen or heard of in the fashion industry, but it's still kind of in its nascent phase in general, but you'll start seeing the uptick of it in other industries before it starts hitting supply chain, is what my estimate of it is.
So in fashion, in a lot of like produced products, it's fraudulent merchandise that's being created, right? So that's one aspect of blockchain that's coming in, where it's now going to be able to be tracked through. Some people are doing it into the fibers. Some people, there's like these like little discs that you can actually sew in. So then it can be traced and it can be that specific one through RFID and other sorts of technology that's there can be then tracked along the blockchain, right? Also for fashion too is that there's a project that I was working on where it was utilizing SMS technology to then tap into farmers, say cotton farmers in India. So then it can be traced all along the entire line of then seeing what the actual the fabric makers can then take the cotton and then know exactly where there's no sort of disconnect along that chain. So then they can be told, we actually only need 10 bales or whatever, units of it. We only need 10 units of it rather than the 50 that we were originally asking for, because that cost then it gets down to the person who's purchasing that fabric on the very end of it, right? So that kind of there's a cost reduced basis that's there as well. Yeah, sorry, texting. Yeah, so because a lot of the farmers in very rural areas of the world, they're still on SMS, so it's like text-based systems, so they don't have smartphones, they just have kind of flip phones and stuff like that. But there's this system that they can actually tap into, and they send text messages to the system, and then that'll put it on the block. And then that'll sort of do the tracking. It's kind of the same thing with the romaine lettuce kind of scenario, right? Where they're then attaching it to those bales, right? They changed their name actually, but yeah, I can give you the information if you like.
Yeah, go for it. So that's one of the really exciting spaces that's transforming. They're called smart contracts. They're self-executing contracts. So essentially, they don't need an actual. You have a contract that's been uploaded to a blockchain with payment. So you don't need a trusted third party. So you no longer need like an escrow agent, or you don't need somebody that sits in the middle of it. Once an action has been done and verified and all uploaded on the cloud, the money will automatically transfer. An example of how it would work is both the parties would, so you would upload, so you can't just like upload dollars to the blockchain. So you have to convert it to, Ethereum is one of the main ones that's doing smart contract execution. So you'd exchange dollars to Ethereum, upload it to to a cloud, or sorry, to the blockchain, and then when you sign and give your they can verify online that it's clean, that you've moved out, and once that's been signed, then your deposit will come back. They'll get the money. You have to have additional steps in that chain where people verify. So yeah, you'd want to have a standardized contract in that case, so that all the parties, because what happens a lot is the contract does exactly what you want it to, which may not be the intended result. Parties have some discretion when they're working together, and they go, this is here, we'll actually just knock off $1,000 for this month, or we'll do this. Versus if you tell the smart contract to do that, it's just a line of computer code. It'll do exactly what you tell it to. So the money will transfer automatically, and you can run into some issues there. Versus if you have a third party sitting in the middle. So now there's starting to be a few companies that are mediating those disputes.
The question is if this can be used to track us. So there's companies that are out there. So there's a lot of countries that are doing this. One of them being Estonia. I have a digital residency for the country of Estonia right now, and that being like I'm on the blockchain as a person in Estonia. I'm not an Estonia resident. It's just an e-resident. It's like an electronic residency for it. But what this allows you to do is that every single contract, every single agreement, like if I went there and I went to their version of the DMV, that would all be done on blockchain then. So every single agreement that happens with a country is done there, right? There's a lot of countries that are trying to implement it as well. I know someone who actually who put Dubai on blockchain to put their citizens on it, and yes, it is a means of traction. Yeah, it's not in the case where we're having to worry about it in that sense, right? People are opting into it, but the nations that do have a government that does push onto their citizens, I don't think that they have an opportunity to opt out of it.